Modern pop psychology has successfully weaponized the concept of boundaries to justify a profound lack of social resilience. When an adult chooses to completely skip a holiday gathering simply because the family dynamics are slightly tense or uncomfortable, they are not demonstrating high emotional intelligence. In clinical terms, retreating from interpersonal friction exposes a severe emotional weakness and a dangerously fragile nervous system. Right now, society is actively rewarding you for running away from difficult conversations, convincing you that avoiding your family makes you enlightened, peaceful, and superior. This is a catastrophic biological lie. By refusing to engage in the chaotic environment of a family holiday, you are not protecting your peace. You are executing a primitive flight response that systematically destroys your cognitive resilience. If you refuse to face the clinical reality of your avoidant behavior today, you will permanently surrender your ability to handle any form of high-stakes social friction in the real world. We are going to clinically tear down the highly profitable delusion of modern self-care and expose the pure biological cowardice hiding behind your supposed boundaries. Understand why this behavior is so incredibly destructive. We must look at the evolutionary biology of the human nervous system. For millions of years, navigating complex, often difficult tribal dynamics was the absolute cornerstone of survival. Your brain is biologically engineered to require social friction to maintain its emotional immune system. Friction is not a bug in human interaction, it is a mandatory feature. When you suddenly decide to completely remove yourself from the unpredictable environment of your family, simply because an uncle asks an intrusive question or a sibling makes a passive-aggressive comment, you are artificially starving your brain of necessary psychological stress. You believe you are taking the high road, but your central nervous system registers this retreat as a massive defeat. It learns that you are fundamentally incapable of holding your ground in the presence of a perceived threat. You are literally training your brain to be weak. Listen to me very carefully, because the neuroplastic window to reverse this biological cowardice is closing more rapidly than you can possibly comprehend as the holidays approach. Every single time you rely on isolation to escape the friction of your family, your brain permanently prunes the neural pathways required for assertiveness and negotiation. The psychological decay compounds daily. If you look away or close this video right now, you are consciously choosing to remain a voluntary victim of your own fragile nervous system, and the dominant personalities in your life will use this exact biological blind spot to walk all over you. You must understand the mechanics of this cognitive failure today before your submission becomes permanent. How does social friction build cognitive resilience? Let us clinically dissect what actually happens inside your brain when you face social friction instead of running away from it. In the realm of behavioral psychology, there is a concept known as stress inoculation. It is the psychological equivalent of a vaccine. By exposing yourself to manageable doses of interpersonal stress, like the chaotic environment of a holiday dinner, you build cognitive antibodies. When you sit at a table across from a family member who disrespects you, and you successfully regulate your breathing, maintain your composure, and hold your intellectual territory without collapsing into a panic attack or storming out of the room, you forge impenetrable neural pathways. You teach your prefrontal cortex that it can override the panic signals sent by your amygdala. When you avoid your family, you completely bypass this biological training ground. You create a sterile, highly curated echo chamber where you never have to face opposition. Because your brain never gets to practice regulating itself under pressure, your baseline tolerance for human conflict drops to zero. You become the psychological equivalent of a person who lives in a sterile bubble. The moment you are exposed to a single germ of reality, your entire immune system collapses. This explains the dark irony behind individuals who constantly post about cutting off toxic family members to protect their peace. They are almost always the most easily triggered, chronically anxious, and emotionally unstable individuals in any professional or social setting. They have not mastered their emotions. They have simply mastered the art of running away from anything that requires actual emotional strength. Are you setting boundaries or running away? We must ruthlessly examine the lie you tell yourself about setting boundaries. You have learned to parrot therapy buzzwords to mask your inability to stand up for yourself. You call it a firm boundary when you block your family's phone numbers in December. You call it guarding your energy when you refuse to show up to the holiday dinner. But clinical boundaries do not require physical absence. A true boundary requires active, highly uncomfortable confrontation. Real psychological boundaries require you to plant your feet in the middle of the chaos, look a toxic family member directly in the eye, verbally enforce your terms of engagement, and absorb their immediate emotional reaction without flinching. Retreating to your apartment and watching Netflix alone on Christmas is not a boundary. It is an escape hatch for the emotionally terrified. By refusing to engage, you strip yourself of all social leverage. You demand that the entire world, including your family, adapt perfectly to your extreme emotional fragility. When they inevitably fail to do so, you label them as toxic and you flee. This is covert narcissism disguised as enlightenment. You are terrified of the discomfort of being disliked, misunderstood, or intellectually challenged. So instead of developing the emotional callus required to let other people be wrong about you, you physically remove yourself from the equation. You are not cultivating inner peace. You are building an invisible prison of avoidance, where your inability to handle a simple conversation dictates the entire trajectory of your holiday season. You will absolutely never hear this clinical reality from mainstream online therapists or modern wellness influencers, because keeping you fragile, agreeable, and completely terrified of social conflict is the foundational backbone of a multi-billion-dollar self-help economy. This is the carefully hidden behavioral architecture that the top 1% of elite communicators use to dominate social hierarchies, while the masses hide in their bedrooms avoiding real confrontation. If you do not master this exclusive biological reality in the next 2 minutes, you will remain their highly profitable prey forever. You simply cannot afford to miss how your own fear of your family is being weaponized to keep you weak. What happens to your brain when you hide? Let us examine the devastating neurochemical consequences of this chronic avoidance. When you decide to skip the family gathering to avoid a potential argument, your brain experiences a massive, immediate release of dopamine. You feel an intense rush of relief. Therefore, the next time you face any form of social pressure, whether it is a difficult negotiation at work or a disagreement with your spouse, your brain will flood your system with severe anxiety until you run away again. You are literally creating a behavioral addiction to avoidance. But this relief is a toxic biological illusion. Your amygdala, the primitive threat detection center of your brain, registers that running away kept you safe from the danger of your family. Over time, this addiction leads to a severe collapse of your self-esteem. Deep down in your subconscious, beneath all the therapy language and the excuses about protecting your peace, your brain knows the truth. It knows that you ran away. It knows that you surrendered your intellectual territory because you were too scared to hold it. This subconscious realization breeds chronic shame and systemic anxiety. You begin to shrink in every area of your life. You stop taking risks in business, you stop speaking your mind in relationships, and you become a passive observer of your own existence. You mistakenly attribute this numbness to a state of stoic calm, but the clinical reality is that your nervous system is trapped in a permanent state of maladaptive flight response. You have not achieved peace, you have simply surrendered your identity. Why do elite operators seek discomfort? Let us contrast your fragile behavior with the exact psychological framework utilized by the most powerful individuals in society. In high CPM environments, elite boardrooms, high-stakes diplomacy, and intense business negotiations, the ability to remain emotionally regulated in the presence of extreme friction is the ultimate indicator of high status. Elite operators do not view a chaotic family dinner as a threat to their peace. They view it as a low-stakes training ground for their nervous system. They willingly walk into the dysfunction of the holidays because they understand that mastering their internal state while surrounded by external chaos is the true definition of power. When a dominant, emotionally intelligent individual sits at a table with a toxic family member, they do not absorb the toxicity. They deploy absolute emotional detachment. They watch the passive-aggressive comments and the emotional manipulation unfold with the sterile curiosity of a scientist observing a flawed experiment. They let the chaos happen around them without letting it penetrate their psychological shield. Because they do not run away, they command absolute respect. Even the most manipulative family members subconsciously recognize that they cannot force this individual to react or retreat. The elite operator retains all their social leverage, their reputation remains intact, and they prove to their own nervous system that they are immovable. By avoiding the gathering entirely, you prove the exact opposite. You signal to everyone involved that they hold ultimate power over your emotional state. The mathematical cost of your inaction today is absolute and unforgiving. Your biological cowardice is actively destroying your social capital, your self-respect, and your mental resilience at this exact second. Every single family gathering you avoid today creates a compounded psychological debt that you will be forced to pay back with severe anxiety and total loss of status tomorrow. You have less than a minute to completely reprogram this cognitive failure before your invisible prison is sealed shut. Your weakness becomes a permanent personality trait, and your identity is entirely erased from the social matrix. Listen closely to the final blueprint. How do you overcome the biological fear of conflict? You have to break the biological code immediately. You must forcefully stop using the concept of boundaries to justify your profound lack of courage. If you want to develop impenetrable psychological resilience, you must willingly step back into the arena of social friction. Authentic human connection and true social dominance are inherently messy, emotionally demanding, and full of conflict. You must let your family members be wrong, you must endure the agonizing friction of their opinions, and you must rapidly learn to regulate your nervous system in the direct presence of a threat, not in the artificial absence of it. You need to execute clinical exposure therapy on yourself this holiday season. When the invitation comes, do not look for the exit. Accept it. Walk into the room. When the conversation inevitably gets tense or someone crosses a line, force your feet to remain firmly planted on the ground. Maintain heavy, unblinking eye contact. Notice the massive spike of adrenaline in your chest, the heat in your face, and the primal urge to retreat, and simply let it exist without acting on it. Stay in the fire. Speak your truth slowly, clinically, and without a single apology. Train your amygdala that interpersonal friction does not equal physical death. Teach your nervous system that you are a competent, dangerous adult who can handle the heat without collapsing. This is the only legitimate path to true emotional intelligence. Anything else is just a highly marketable delusion sold to you by people who want to keep you weak, agreeable, and easily controlled. The psychological prison of avoidance is absolutely real, but now you possess the exact clinical blueprint to dismantle its walls, brick by brick. You are no longer blind to your own biological cowardice, which means you no longer have any excuse to remain a voluntary victim of your own fear. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon to master your primal psychology before the covert manipulators in your circle use your remaining behavioral blind spots to completely destroy you. Check the resources in the description to actively rebuild your cognitive framework from the ground up and start operating like the top 1% of human behavior experts. Stop lying to yourself about your boundaries. You are not protecting your peace. You are running away from the very friction required to forge your strength. It is time to step into the fire, face your family, and reclaim your biological dominance today.